This is Bloomberg's special coverage of the 2024 Iowa caucuses. Live from Des Moines, alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
It's 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central Time, and the first real contest in the race for the Republican presidential nomination begins at this hour. Iowa's registered Republican voters are gathering in person now to caucus and choose who they'd like to see as the party's nominee.
Former President Donald Trump remains the frontrunner, holding a wide lead over former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Polling suggests they're competing for second place tonight. Haley's building momentum, helping her overtake DeSantis in recent surveys, but Donald Trump is ahead of her by 28 points in the so-called gold standard poll. It was released just Saturday. The issues that matter to caucus goers as they weigh their choices: the economy and inflation. 81% of Iowa's Republican voters say it's extremely important to them, with immigration and border security close behind.
But will that drive them to brave the weather and turn out this evening? Almost 2 feet of snow falling here in the Hawkeye State in the past few days, and a wind chill as low as 35 below zero in some parts, according to the National Weather Service. This is Iowa's coldest caucus day on record. And so, Joe, in many senses, history already has been made here in Iowa tonight, as this is a record cold caucus. But we could see more history made still if we see, as expected, Donald Trump victorious here by a record margin.
That's true. And the conventional wisdom is that Trump could outperform based on passion. We're talking about families, caucus goers, who have a long way to drive in this cold. It's just beginning now, by the way, the caucusing as we speak, gathering, listening to speeches, choosing a candidate. We have over a foot of snow behind us here in Des Moines.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a long evening. Of course, we'll be bringing you results as we have them. It might take a while for them to trickle in. But one of those individuals bringing us results this evening is Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. She is live at the Iowa Media Center. So, Tyler, what do we know as we enter this first real contest in the 2024 Republican race?
Well, hey, Kaylee, as you know, one of the differences between a primary and a caucus is that you have to go in person. So I'm going to be paying close attention to turnout tonight. Remember, in 2016, Republicans set that record with 186,000 caucus goers. So that is the number to beat. But I don't have to remind either of you guys, it is freezing cold here in Iowa. A state party official tells me he doesn't think the cold is going to deter Iowans from coming to their caucus tonight. And to be honest, it didn't deter them from going to candidate events over the weekend. Here's one Iowan voter I spoke to about the pride he feels in voting in this first in the nation state.
People are very much taking their job seriously, of looking at all the candidates and making sure that we have the best candidate that we're going to caucus. We're going to be able to see the campaign people and kind of know what they are because we've been going to these events and whatnot. So even if it's bitterly cold, it's worthwhile to go see what they believe in, see what they're going to do, and know that the candidates are actually going to show up when it's cold and do the work. And that's more indicative of their drive in the presidency as well.
Now, you have to be a registered Republican to caucus tonight, but you could change your party affiliation up until the caucus start time. Joe and Kaylee, the state party says they are expecting more independents and conservative Democrats to show up to caucus tonight.
Tyler, we thank you. We'll be in touch with Tyler throughout the evening with updates. And once the numbers start to trickle in, Kaylee, that will likely be in our second hour. We'll keep you posted on what we learn as we know it. It's very possible we could get an early call tonight on the winner of this race, knowing the commanding lead that Trump has. The second and third place that we're all obsessing over, though, might take some time.
Well, that's exactly right. And if whether or not it's Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis who could get second or third, or could we see a surprise from Vivek Ramaswamy, who is still a factor in this race as well? We're all going to have to stay tuned
He's promising a shock result tonight, though I guess we've heard that before. Let's get into it now with our political panel. They came to Des Moines with us as well. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, with us at the table. Happy Caucus Day. It's great to see you both here. Rick, you've survived a couple of these.
Yes.
What feels different tonight? We're talking about essentially a four-way race, and everyone seems to know, they think they know who the winner is.
Yeah, first of all, what's different tonight is we're all freezing.
That's
yes,
the coldest caucus on record was not something I thought I'd ever be a part of. But now that we're here, I think that it's two lines of thought. One, can Donald Trump really dominate this caucus? Is he going to get over 50%? Is he going to win all 99 counties? I mean, like, how high is high enough for Donald Trump? And then the second line is the contest going on for second place. Can Nikki Haley make good on the polling data that we received this week from the Des Moines Register, showing her in second place for the first time? Or is Ron DeSantis the new comeback kid? Before he's even had to come back, he's coming back, and he hopes to be able to take that number 2 spot from Nikki Haley and preserve an option to go to New Hampshire.
Well, I guess we'll see if he adopts the comeback kid moniker. Right now, he's really leaning into the underdog. It seems. Rick brought up the Des Moines Register poll. And yes, we all paid attention to the headline figures. Trump at 48, Nikki Haley 28 points behind at 20, DeSantis at 16. Are we going to find out that those are the figures that matter, or rather the enthusiasm figures in that same poll that show that Nikki Haley caucus goers aren't necessarily that excited about it as they are for Trump and DeSantis?
Yeah, that was one of the fascinating things about the poll was while Nikki Haley for the first time came in number 2, she has much less enthusiastic supporters on her side than not just Donald Trump, but also Ron DeSantis, her major number 2 competitor. And so if it's this cold out and you're, mildly enthusiastic or not at all, are you really going to go out at night and sit at a meeting in 30-degree below zero weather? I mean, it's asking a lot. And so she knows that. She has factored that in. And, the other thing about Nikki Haley's support that is interesting is that she's getting tons of support from independents and Democrats. And we just heard Tyler talking about the fact that Democrats or anybody can change the registration day of and vote. I'm curious to see if we see any of that. I don't suspect Democrats would be at all, feeling comfortable to waltz into a Republican, family meeting and announce that they were changing their registration in there. But we may see spoilers like that. So there's an awful lot that can happen at a caucus like this.
Interesting to hear Ann Selzer's comments, who, of course, ran that poll with regard to the enthusiasm gap and what appeared to be a surprisingly strong number, top-line number for Nikki Haley. She said the deep data on Haley suggests she looks stronger in the poll than she could on caucus night. We'll find out if that's the case, of course, together here. The presidential field narrowing. One of the former candidates joined Haley and I on set earlier today as we asked North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum why he decided late in the game here to throw his support behind former President Trump. Here he is.
I endorsed President Trump in 2016, and I caucused for him in Iowa in 2020. So for the folks back home, it wouldn't be a surprise. The issues facing this country, the things that we campaigned on hard in our campaign was economy, energy, national security, 3 things that Bloomberg, covers in depth. And when you take a look at the field of candidates that are here, and you take a look at President Biden, you say, who's the person who's got the most experience and best equipped to take us in the right direction on those 3 important and interrelated issues? It's President Trump. And he's going to have a big showing tonight. He'll have a record finish in terms of the largest win ever by a candidate in a Iowa caucus. And I think it's going to be the, day one. People, I think you're going to see other candidates and other people stepping forward and endorsing in the, coming weeks and coming months, because we've got to get the Republican Party united around one candidate. And everyone's been saying we need to narrow the field. Well, let's narrow it to the person that's leading in all 50 states, and let's get going and start talking about Joe Biden's record and get this country headed in the right direction again.
Well, the field certainly narrowed when you yourself left the race, but when you were still seeking the nomination, you had said in an interview when asked if you would do business with the former president, I don't think so, and you suggested it's because you're judged by the company you keep. Do you not fear that judgment anymore?
Well, it's a very different business versus politics, and in business there's a wide range of opportunities. I'm not a New York real estate developer. I'm a tech guy. I'm an ag guy. I've got an energy background. But when you take a look at the at politics and what it takes to actually lead and win in this thing, it's going to be a Trump versus Biden race unless the Democrats decide to pull somebody else in. So it's not an infinite number of choices. It's a binary choice, and this choice is very clear and very simple. That we've got a candidate in President Trump who who is going to be successful at driving our country forward.
You just mentioned you have an ag and energy background, and I asked you this when you were still in the race. The idea that would you be interested in being energy secretary, ag secretary, even secretary of the interior? Has that answer changed now that you're no longer seeking the nomination? Would you accept it if President Trump were to offer?
Well, I've got a couple things on my plate. One is I've got a day job right now as governor of North Dakota, which I love, and I've got to make a decision in the next week or so on whether I'm going to run for another term for that position. And of course, the private sector, where I spent most of my life, I think the opportunities there have never been greater in the private sector. AI is over my lifetime, technology's changed every job, every company, and every industry, and now that's happening at an accelerated rate. And I think there's a lot of exciting ways to contribute on that side as well. So I've got a lot of things to think about. But today, we're here campaigning for President Trump. We'll be in New Hampshire tomorrow, supporting him. And I think the important thing is for us to just take the victory tonight and send a message to the nation and the world that the Republican Party is going to be supporting once again Donald J. Trump for the presidency.
That was North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum speaking with us earlier today after having just endorsed former President Trump in this race. And Rick, that brings me to a question. We have seen many endorsements lined up for the former president. I believe half of the House of Representatives at this point has endorsed him. Obviously, you've seen here in Iowa, Governor DeSantis endorsed by the governor, Kim Reynolds. Nikki Haley has picked up Governor Chris Sununu in New Hampshire. But she hasn't had a lot of endorsements to this point. And I just wonder how much that factors in to a race in this early stage of the game like this one.
Yeah, no, I think that her strategy is actually quite unique. The fact that she hasn't focused on actually getting a lot of endorsements, maybe it's because she didn't think she could, and why waste time on that? But she got a very strategic endorsement, right? The one we remember and talk about all the time is the incredibly popular governor of New Hampshire. And it came at a time where it seemed to be helping her momentum along. In other words, it had an impact. What we're seeing, at least with DeSantis's campaign, is the early endorsements that he got didn't seem to help him. He sort of continued to slide down since his announcement. And the endorsement of the incredibly popular Governor Kim Reynolds here has done nothing for his numbers. I mean, there's not a poll that shows any upward movement since her endorsement. Now, many of the Iowa consultants that I've talked to here, Republicans, say, well, it came kind of late. It wasn't really properly rolled out. She hasn't been able to really cement that relationship the way Iowa voters like to see it done. But at the end of the day, right now, the only one that is really playing the endorsement game is Donald Trump. And it's hard to argue that it hasn't helped him.
So what does that mean then, Jeannie? It's not the endorsement that counts. It's the candidate. It's the organization.
It's the organization. It's the candidates. But also, could you imagine, just to jump off Rick's point, imagine if Reynolds and Sununu joined forces to combat Donald Trump by actually endorsing the same candidate. I mean, we just saw this split amongst these very popular governors in their own states. And of course, it's, just reflective of where the party is today. Donald Trump is sweeping in with all these endorsements, and the anti-Trump folks are left floundering, which is exactly where he wanted them, unable to unify. And so they are left with organization, critically important, and money. But DeSantis has done all of those things, tons of money he's blown through, lots of organization, super PACs galore, has not helped him really at all. And he's been living in Iowa for a long time now.
Sure has. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are sticking with us here as we work our way through this caucus evening. Coming up, a conversation with Ken Cuccinelli, the founder of Never Back Down. That's the DeSantis Super PAC. Former Virginia Attorney General will join us here at the desk next on our special Iowa caucus coverage on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is special global coverage of the Iowa caucuses on Bloomberg TV and radio, where caucus goers are now gathering in places like Des Moines and elsewhere across the state to make their selection as to who they'd like to see be the Republican nominee in 2024. Of course, there are many in play: former President Donald Trump, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And earlier today, we spoke with Ken Cuccinelli, who's former Attorney General of Virginia and founder of the DeSantis super PAC, Never Back Down.
There's Trump, who's much like an incumbent, and then there's DeSantis, who is the universal second choice for those for whom he's not the first choice. So I think there's a clear path for him in a variety of scenarios. And while we've knocked on over 900,000 doors in Iowa, we've knocked on over 3 million nationwide. So we're still knocking in New Hampshire. The South Carolina team came up to Iowa here for the last couple of weeks, but we've been building all around the country. So we're built to last with a guy who's got perseverance and work ethic in Governor DeSantis that really inspires a lot of folks around the country. And so we're looking forward to a good night tonight, beating expectations substantially. And then we're going to move on to New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada.
There've been a lot of questions about why he didn't start talking about telling his own personal story earlier. At an event last night, a number of my colleagues, including Kaylee, heard him go there, and it connected with the crowd. You know what it's like to run for office. Likability is just part of the deal here. And I wonder how you answer critics who say that he's not able to connect with people when it comes to retail politics. He's not enjoying it. I saw an analysis piece last week on his smile. How has that impacted his interactions with people here in Iowa?
Well, he is who he is.
What don't we know about him that you want us to know?
I think he's authentic. I think he is a hard charger. He's a workhorse, not a show horse. If you want a show horse, you've got Donald Trump in the race. And part of the reason I'm here supporting Governor DeSantis, as you all know, I served in the Trump administration. I was acting deputy secretary at DHS. Yep. And a lot of my disappointments about a lot of the shallow positions that weren't followed through on are why I'm with DeSantis. And, you combine that with his conservative record and Donald Trump not fulfilling promises. And let's talk about a couple of those real quick. I'll just rattle them off. The debt. Mm-hmm. He added more debt than any other president, including Joe Biden, in history. And he said he was going to balance the budget. He also said things like, "Oh, I'm going to prosecute Hillary." Now that was a bit of a rough one. But days after the campaign, he said, "Oh, I didn't mean it. She's a nice lady." And what else doesn't he mean?
And the governor has raised the border wall. But my question is, how can Governor DeSantis pledge as president to finish that job when he would face the very same hurdles from the Oval Office of doing what Trump tried to do and couldn't? You need congressional approval in the appropriations process when you talk about funding this. How would it be different for DeSantis?
I think that, first of all, let's take Virginia, where I live. We have 11 congressional districts. 3 of them are swing districts. They're unwinnable with Trump at the top of the ticket. They're winnable with DeSantis at the top of the ticket. And you look at what he did in Florida in 2022. This is a guy who pays attention to helping the rest of his team. Donald Trump doesn't do that. Donald Trump is about Donald Trump. And Ron DeSantis builds those teams and helps them win. So he'll have more allies there in 24, in 26 than Donald Trump will, simply because he'll help them get there. He's also a better ticket head for winning. There's a reason so many state legislators, including here in Iowa, 42 of them in Iowa, it isn't just Governor Reynolds, are supporting Governor DeSantis. Ted Cruz won Iowa with 12 legislators supporting him. These folks down ticket, same is true in New Hampshire, know the carnage that Donald Trump brings at the top of the ticket. We've done nothing but lose as a party since Donald Trump became the face of the party, except in Florida.
That was Ken Cuccinelli, former Attorney General of Virginia and founder of the Never Back Down, the DeSantis super PAC. And Rick, just to bring you in on the point he was making about how this decision on who they would like to see be the Republican nominee actually impacts the down ballot races, could impact the balance of the House and the Senate, who has control in Washington. How much, especially for our global audience, should they consider Iowa a factor in that tonight?
Yeah, I think definitely if it empowers Donald Trump, if he has a big night tonight and he cruises to an early state victory in New Hampshire and South Carolina, he'll be basically the presumptive nominee. And you have a raft of primaries ahead of him. He can influence that dramatically by picking his guys and people to run in those districts. And this was part of the problem that Cuccinelli talked about, is that you pick the wrong candidates, you can't win down ballot. And Trump picks a lot of bad candidates.
He told us that he'd be more surprised if Ron DeSantis came in third than if he won. Jeannie, what do you make of that?
Yeah, you know, I think he raises a number of good points, but I think what he's missing is what we're hearing from voters on the Republican side, which is that they feel that Donald Trump was robbed. They liked his presidency. They don't see him as some evil authoritarian leader. They want the Trump presidency back, and they feel Ron DeSantis should have waited 4 years until Donald Trump had his turn and then to come back. And that's maddening for people, I'm sure, like Ken Cuccinelli, but that's where the Republican primary vote and caucus voters are, and that's why the polls show him up so much.
Well, and he is speaking in Des Moines, Iowa right now as we speak here tonight. Of course, he's probably preparing for what he expects to be a pretty good night for him, but it comes back to the question of the margin. And Rick, we've discussed this at length over the course of the many days leading up to this, the idea that the bar is set incredibly high. He's polling 50% or north in most polls. The historic margin in Iowa has been 12 points. So he's very likely to make history regardless. But is anything less than 50 going to be something he feels like he can tout as he moves forward throughout this primary season?
Yeah, he's kind of created his own high expectations, right? I mean, all he's been talking about is we're going to send him a really clear message that I am the king. And so over 50% is what they are putting out that they think they need. And the reality is he is a former president. I mean, we've never had a situation where it's kind of like an incumbent running. Typically, you would have no opposition. So you better get over 50% because the reality is they want to create this image that he's actually still the president of the United States.
All right. Rick and Jeannie will stay with us, as we mentioned, throughout the evening here. We want to turn now and get a check on Asian markets with Bloomberg's David Ingles in Hong Kong. David?
Yep. Hi. Good morning from the Asia Pacific. And it's, I was going to say it's shaping up. It's the last few minutes, it's shaping down to be to really risk-off session. You have a couple of markets coming in line in a moment here, the big markets in Hong Kong and China. Just very quickly here, as you can see, we're down on price about 1%. Every single sector is down just about here in the Asia Pacific. That's coming through as well. U.S. futures, as you can see, we're steady on Brent despite the escalations of the tensions in the Red Sea. Just really a proxy of dollar strength we're seeing, not just against the euro. Flip the boards, please, but just against really just about every single currency right now. You had U.S. futures, Treasury futures there were cheaper across the curve, across the Treasury markets. The Nikki's leading some of the declines right now, 0.7%. We have a 5-year bond auction in Japan today. We're trading near multi-month lows. At least we're back above zero on the 2-year yield. Very quickly, before I go, just have a look at where we are across Chinese markets right now. So really, in many ways, ground zero of the equity pain so far. Just for context and taking a step back, right? It's been generally a good year so far for risk assets. A lot of markets in the Asia Pacific have been bid up. We talked about Japan, for example. This is one major market that's actually missed the boat. I think we're up only 1 or 2 times so far this year. And just ahead of the open, futures are pointing to a substantial drop at the open here, 16,000, which effectively puts us back to levels of 14 months ago on these major benchmarks. The 10-year yield in China, 252. That's really one bright spot within the Chinese market story, up 10, 11 out of the last 11 or 12 weeks or so. And we're tracking shares of Baidu after that collapse really in shares yesterday, Joe. Down 11%. The company's issued a statement, so we'll see how much further we get buying into the open today. So the open in China and here in Hong Kong, 4 minutes away. I'll send it back to you guys. And I believe a very warm Iowa, isn't it? Is it?
Well, no. People keep saying, David, thank you, that it's freezing. We're well below freezing is the point. We fell below zero on Saturday, and it won't go back above zero till we're all gone, is what we're told. So that is the backdrop of this caucus.
And we're talking Fahrenheit here. I know there might be people watching and listening who think in Celsius terms, but just know that it's very, very cold, and that is what caucus goers are having to brave to participate in this Democratic event this evening. And it's a question, Joe, of actually, when the numbers come in, how many we'll find out actually did.
This is a big reality for the campaigns this evening. And of course, as we continue our special coverage, we'll keep tabs on the markets for you throughout the evening and let you know what we're watching. Coming up, more special coverage of the Iowa caucus next. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Are you concerned about the message to markets that we keep seeing out of Washington when it comes to government spending and the shutdown deadlines, kind of these constant clashes in Congress and with the White House when it comes to funding our government?
Yeah, I mean, and clearly Washington has significant chaos. I think that's one of the challenges that, there certainly should be some common sense things to manage the budget and stop wasteful government spending at the same time of incentivizing private business to invest, unless there's more of a comprehensive plan. But it's clear there is a divergence of views in Washington, and the inability to manage together and work together is just so sad that that's happening to the country that we can't fix that.
Comments from Bruce Restetter, live from Des Moines, Iowa. Special global caucus coverage here on Bloomberg. We're glad you're with us as we turn to Bloomberg's Julie Fine now, who's going to be watching results as they come in, joining us from down the road in Des Moines at the Election Center. Julie, how are things going there?
Things are going very well. We've had a lot of special guests in and out of here tonight. When I say special guests, we're talking about surrogates for the candidates. I saw Eric Trump, the son of the former president, in here tonight telling me we are going to win this one. Now, for our global audience, we're bringing you right to Iowa here. It is the first nominating contest of 2016 for Republicans. The numbers, they have not yet come in. So what we're really dealing with right here, right now, is the calm before the storm, Joe, as you well know. It's really a waiting game right now as we wait for those numbers to come in. Now, the Iowa Republican Party chairman stopped by us to see us at Bloomberg. We spoke to him for a while, and he basically told us he does not anticipate there to be any problems here tonight at all. He says any kinks that they have had in past years have been worked out by now. Let's also talk a little bit about the weather. The weather tonight, obviously very cold, but he also told us that he was concerned about ice. And he wasn't concerned as much if there wasn't ice that there wouldn't be a good showing. So the temperatures have plummeted extremely low. 2016, as you guys know, there were some very, very high numbers. They broke records for people coming to vote in the caucuses. Not sure that this will happen this year, especially because of the weather. But again, we're waiting to see the numbers come in on that. Joe, here are some of the counties I'm specifically looking at. You have Sioux County. Again, DeSantis, the current governor of Florida, needs to do very well there. And then in Dallas County in the Des Moines suburbs, Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, really needs to have a strong showing there as well. So those are what we are looking for here tonight. But again, the first nominating contest in the United States, expected to say a lot. Former President Trump wants to make a big statement here. He wants to have a huge number. Now we'll just wait to see if that happens. Joe?
Just like
well,
that,
we don't
Haley.
know the number yet. Julie Fine, thank you so much. But the Associated Press has officially called it Donald Trump wins the Iowa Republican caucuses. That is 32 minutes after they began. We have this race called, at least in terms of number one, but we wait to find out about 2 and 3. So joining us now around the table, Bloomberg's Laura Davison and Mike Shepard, who are here with us in studio in Des Moines. So, Mike Shepard, we pretty much knew that this was going to happen and that it was very likely to happen early. It would have surprised everyone if that were not the case. Now it's a matter of sitting around and waiting to see numbers 2 and 3. Do we have any indication yet of what way everyone who's not Trump is trending right now?
Well, we were reporting with the campaigns and their operations and allies earlier today, and the next three after Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, and Vivek Ramaswamy, their operations each professed confidence that they would be the one to finish in second place. Now, there's only room for one in that spot, and it's a really important one, as we have discussed. The question of whether Trump was going to win was really an anticlimax, as we just saw 32 minutes in. But it may take some time tonight for us to find out who actually takes the number 2 spot.
Could be a couple of hours or maybe more. We waited days last time around here. But Laura, this, my goodness, a half an hour into the evening, the Associated Press is calling this. We weren't even sure we'd get initial results for another 15 minutes or so. What does this early call tell us about Donald Trump's apparent commanding lead?
This shows us this is a massive, massive lead, which is potentially not good news for DeSantis, Haley, Ramaswamy, and really they both want to all be kind of as close to Trump as they can be, narrow that margin. You know, Trump has been somewhere up 30 points roughly over the past several weeks and months. Really a nightmare scenario for both DeSantis and Haley, who have been battling for number 2, is if they both come in sort of neck and neck, number 2 again. That means they go to New Hampshire and will have to fight it out there.
Wow.
Well, and while we know, Laura, that Trump has won the Iowa caucuses, we do not yet know about how much. And there has been a question of the bar for some time now. 50% plus, anything beyond 12 points, which was the previous record set decades ago. What number is Bloomberg looking for? How are you looking at the figures here?
What number we're looking at, and really the whole political world is looking for, is does Donald Trump get above that 51% mark? And he can say, look, I have a majority, however small that majority is, of Republicans behind me. And that just starts narrowing the field, narrowing the possibilities for anyone who wants to be the main alternative to him. You know, if you have Haley, who is, 20%, in some states, New Hampshire's one of her best states, next on the calendar, a little bit north of 20%. But that's not saying Donald Trump can say, look, I have the party behind me. Let's move forward. Let's end this contest and let's move on to the general election against Biden.
Trump came in at 48%, I believe, in the Seltzer poll over the weekend. He was down from 51, where he really wants to be. Are we making too much of the intricacies of expectations here? 48% versus 51. Is the talk of moral victory a little too cute for you when you look at how strong a second place finisher might be?
Well, Joe, you and I have talked about sports before and big margins of victory. And while we don't want to liken this too much to sports, I think that what Laura was talking about in terms of Trump getting that 51%, that absolute majority, would give him the leverage and the position where he could actually turn his focus directly to the general election and stop worrying as much about whether Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis or even Vivek Ramaswamy poses any kind of a credible challenge to him in the next primary contest. We're looking at New Hampshire, but then we're heading to South Carolina at the end of February, and that is Nikki Haley's home turf.
Yeah, absolutely, and she still trails the former president significantly in polls in her home state. There was a lot of conversation coming into tonight about the weather. Obviously, we all have seen it. We've all experienced it. This idea that actually it may work against Trump because he was the clear front runner. People may not feel as compelled to go out and caucus for him in this kind of weather when they assume he's going to win anyway. Does the race getting called this early suggest that that did not happen? Or does it suggest anything more broadly about turnout to you?
Well, it may be early to have that decided or said for us just now. What they are saying that they're able to call the race, it is too difficult for the others to catch him. Now, when it comes to the actual turnout, the total numbers, that's going to affect the rest of the field more than Trump himself in a way, because if you're Ron DeSantis, a high turnout would really favor Trump and potentially hurt you. DeSantis has staked a lot of his campaign on Iowa. He's built a big ground game, but enthusiasm for Donald Trump has run really high if you look at that Seltzer poll that you mentioned, Joe.
So that's the point, though. For every negative narrative, there's a positive one. You can say, well, people take Trump for granted. They think he's going to win and stay home. But then there's another dose of conventional wisdom that the passion, that his followers are the ones who will crawl through glass or ice in this case to help their man. And it's feeling more like the latter.
Yeah, and if you look at the data, this Seltzer poll, really renowned poll in Iowa, showed that Trump had by and large the most enthusiastic supporters. Haley only had 9% of her supporters who said that they were extremely enthusiastic to go out and support. Right. You also look at just the numbers of kind of who those people are, half of whom were independents and Democrats. So maybe not necessarily wanting to vote for her in the general, but just wanting to put up a roadblock to Trump. And if it's, -30 with wind chill, you have something else. You can't make it to your caucus site at 7 p.m. It just doesn't happen.
This is fascinating, Kaylee, because we know that Ron DeSantis is fighting for many of these same votes in areas like Sioux County, as Julie Fine pointed out. This is going to be the test of that ground operation that we've been hearing about for days and weeks.
Yes, indeed.
And that'll obviously unfold over the course of the evening. To Michael's point, could take a minute. Our big thanks to Mike Shepard and Laura Davison with us here at the table in Iowa. Coming up, an interview with Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio's special global coverage of the Iowa caucuses.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Television and Radio's special coverage of the Iowa caucuses, which we now know, according to the Associated Press, has been called for former President Donald Trump. He had a commanding lead in the polls. It was widely expected that he would win here in Iowa. What we still do not know is who's going to get second place and who will come in third. And as we await that information, joining us back around the table are Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our political analysts here at Bloomberg. Okay, so Rick, we know that he was number one. We expected that he was number one. As we wait to see or try to get a better idea of who's going to come in just behind him, what counties specifically are you watching? Where does Nikki Haley need to grab votes, and where does Ron DeSantis need to grab votes?
So a lot of the early votes that are coming in from Polk County. That's right around the corner from here. And that's where AP basically used their algorithm to make a decision that Trump had won, because Trump has done really well in Polk County so far. So that's kind of easy, low-hanging fruit. The urban areas, Polk, Story, Dallas County, in this region will be really a lot of the early vote that comes in. So over the next 30 minutes, you'll be seeing a lot of that suburban Des Moines vote. And that is where Nikki Haley is looking to do well. She is basically looking at a Rubio strategy from 2016, where he won Polk, Story, Dallas County, but he also won Scott and Johnson County. And those 5 counties make up sort of the higher, more urban areas of the state, and a little bit more moderate voters. And that's where I think Nikki Haley was looking to sort of replicate his success there.
So that's Nikki Haley country, maybe. Are you surprised by this early call by the Associated Press? Why not let this breathe for 5 more minutes?
I am stunned. We are, a half hour in, they call it. I mean, it is a stunning, I think it may be, is it the fastest you all have ever seen? It is the fastest I have ever seen. And I think now the question is, does Trump sweep all 99 counties? How far above or, close to 50 is he? And of course, we're all waiting to see who is number 2 and who is number 3. But I think we have to step back and say he did this. He did not participate in one debate. He has visited here, but not nearly as much as Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, or certainly Vivek Ramaswamy. So he has been able to do this basically by running back and forth to courtrooms. And this just shows you he is the incumbent that Rick mentioned earlier. He is running as an incumbent. He is beloved by the base of this party. And now the question is, what does he do as he moves through? And this thing could be wrapped up with 2 nominees for the major parties in a matter of, maybe even before Super Tuesday at this point. And by the way, 2 very unpopular people at the top of both tickets if Trump gets it. And of course, Biden will be the Democrat.
Well, Jeannie, you talk about essentially the earned media, right? That Trump happens to get very easily, not just as an incumbent, but also as a criminal defendant in many different counts, a civil defendant as well, has presented a lot of opportunity for him to get attention without necessarily having to spend money, maybe having to spend money on his attorneys perhaps in those cases, but not on things like advertising. And we know that a lot has been shelled out, Rick, here in Iowa. I believe the latest numbers from Ad Impact were something to the tune of $120 million. And Trump still won, and won early. We don't know about how much, but clearly decisive.
Yep.
Are we learning that money doesn't matter in a personality contest? Is that what this is?
Well, I wouldn't say that. Now, Trump's PAC, MAGA PAC, has spent almost $15 million here in Iowa on advertising. And a lot of it was targeted at Ron DeSantis when he was the presumptive challenger. And I think you're right. I mean, Trump has found a different way to campaign for president, doing all the things that Jeannie described, not attending debates, not coming to the state. Again, he is a former incumbent president, right? So we've not seen how this kind of thing can impact a primary. Now we're starting to see it. And I would say, too, he has artfully done something that nobody expected him to do, and that was turn a bunch of legal cases, 91 indictments, into a campaign itself. He has actually gone to a lot of these cases where he wasn't even required to be there in order to establish some kind of a media presence and make a statement. And his statement is very consistent with his overall campaign statement, which is, they're not just coming after me, they're coming after all of you. And if you stick together with me, we can break down these institutions that are threatening us. And so, yeah, that is the Trump campaign, whether he's campaigning in a state or whether he's in a courtroom.
So the retribution tour was smart politics, apparently, as now multiple networks call this race for Donald Trump, Jeannie, based on what Rick was just saying then. Was it the candidate or the organization?
You know, I think it's both. I mean, Donald Trump, like him or hate him, has really dominated the Republican Party since he came to the forefront in 2016. You know, you're just talking about earned media, free media versus paid media.
Yeah.
Well, when he did the town hall the other day and he counter-programmed to the debate that he did not attend, Nielsen told us that the audience for that town hall was double that of the debate. So, I mean, we just think about that. It's almost every single statistic you can talk about, whether it is the spending, whether it is the poll numbers, whether it is viewership on something he does. He has dominated, and he has done so smartly. I would also add on the campaign organization, he is running a very smart campaign. He is very well organized, much better than he was in 2016 here and elsewhere. And he is making inroads in almost every state with the state party leaders. And that really does show itself on the ground and with these numbers we're seeing.
But when it comes to Donald Trump specifically, Jeannie, we've talked a lot about how there's been the retribution tour, this idea that many Republican voters perhaps are sympathetic because he has been indicted many times under what some believe to be a corrupt Department of Justice or a weaponization of the justice system. Whether or not that's true, is it more about that, or is it about issues like the economy and the border, which we understand rank incredibly highly in the minds of not just Iowans, but Republicans more widely, even the broader electorate? What is it about policy there that may be resonating, that the former president has put forward or already had undergone during his first term?
You know, I think it's a combination of both. It's certainly who he is and his service to the country that many Republicans admire and want to see replicated again. But it's also the issues. I mean, you mentioned the economy. Joe Biden, the numbers are good on paper, but you look at the polls and the numbers are really, really dismal for Joe Biden on the economy. Same thing, the border. And that was something Donald Trump ran on in 2016. So you would think voters may ask, well, hey, you were president for 4 years. Why didn't you fix it? And yet he is able to answer that and say, it was robbed of the election in 2020. Otherwise, this would have been done. So I think it's a combination of both.
Well, if you're just joining us in our special global caucus coverage, the race has been called for Donald Trump. We now begin the wait for second and third place and margins.
Yep.
Kaylee, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzana were with us for the duration, live from Iowa. Coming up, much more coverage of the caucuses on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I don't think that it's a foregone conclusion. I know my view in that respect is at odds with what most of the professional political pundits say, and I claim no expertise on that. I've been through the process. I've run 4 national campaigns, and I've seen it from that perspective, and I've seen a lot of surprises over the years. And something tells me this may be a year of significant surprises.
Former Vice President Al Gore weighing in on the possibility of a Trump nominee as the Republican in Davos earlier today. Our political panel is back with us. Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. So, Rick, he says it's not a foregone conclusion that Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. We have people all over the world joining us on television and radio this evening. Why would anyone look at a result that was called 32 minutes into the first in the nation contest, knowing how far he's leading in the polls, and think otherwise?
Well, I can only steer them back to the 2000 campaign for president, the primary, a very dominant campaign by George W. Bush, who was incredibly popular governor of Texas, who was the son of the president, came rolling into Iowa. It's going to be easy. I'm going to be the nominee. Everybody was supposed to fade away. Just let him have it. And he did. He won the Iowa caucus, handily, called early. And then a week later, he was in New Hampshire and lost by 19 points to John McCain and opened up a furious fight for the nomination that lasted past Super Tuesday. So that was supposed to be a foregone conclusion, too. It smells a little bit like that when we go off to New Hampshire tomorrow to see what's going on there, because we have a dead heat in the polls in New Hampshire, and maybe some of this momentum that Nikki Haley has gotten will continue and make it a real race.
Are we suggesting that Donald Trump is the new Mike Huckabee or Rick Santorum? There have been a lot of folks who have won this caucus who never went much further from that.
Iowa doesn't have a good track record in recent years of their winner going on to be the nominee of the party. That said, I think one thing to keep in mind that we haven't seen for many, many decades in this country is an incumbent president running in what we're describing as a competitive caucus, but is actually, not obviously 32 minutes in, not as quite competitive as I'm sure his opponents would want it to be. This is somebody widely popular, but he also served for 4 years as president and continues to say he was robbed in 2020. So I keep questioning, should we look at this as a contested caucus or an incumbent? And if you look at him as an incumbent in this thing, he should be getting 70, 80, 90%. I don't think he'll get there. We don't know yet. So, it's a very unusual year. And so I think we have to be careful about what lessons we draw from it for that perspective.
Rick, to go back to your point on we could see something else upsetting happen in New Hampshire. If it doesn't happen in New Hampshire, if Nikki Haley can't top him there, depending obviously on the outcome that she sees here in Iowa, then will it be a foregone conclusion? How many states to go until we can say that?
Well, just to remind everybody, next week is New Hampshire, and then there are 4 weeks between New Hampshire and South Carolina. And so if Trump does run the table and gets both Iowa and New Hampshire, a really unusual thing, then he's got 4 weeks to consolidate his hold on South Carolina. And we've seen early polling. The campaign hasn't gotten to South Carolina yet, so it's not reflective of a real campaign. But right now, he's 20 points ahead of Nikki Haley, who calls it home. So, and then after that, the really next big thing is Super Tuesday. So he could actually walk into Super Tuesday basically unchallenged at that point.
Wow, incredible. After all the talk of Nikki Haley momentum, this could be shifting under our feet once again. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano continue their great analysis with us in a caucus that has been called for Donald Trump. We'll have a lot more coverage here from Des Moines. And our global audiences on TV and radio will return at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. This is Bloomberg. From Des Moines, Iowa, to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Bloomberg's special coverage of the Iowa Republican caucuses. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. It is 8 o'clock Central, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Kaylee, caucusing began an hour ago, and the race was called 32 minutes later. We did not expect to have a turnout like this in terms of the race being called, at least for Donald Trump. We will wait for second and third, but all the talk of low turnout, for instance, has us wondering here after the AP made such an early and decisive move.
Well, we knew that the former president was likely to win here in Iowa. We knew potentially that we could get it called this early, but I think how early surprised us all. And Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is with us now with more. So, Tyler, do we have an understanding of how and why this call was made so early?
Right, so hardly any precincts are in, but based on the ones that are, polling and reporting on the ground, the Associated Press feels confident calling this for former President Trump. But to put this into context for you, less than 1% of the expected ballots that we expect tonight are in. Now, from the counties that are starting to report their precincts, we're seeing eastern Iowa counties come in. These are counties like Jones County, Clinton County, Cedar County. Now, remember, we think of Iowa often as an agricultural state, which it is, but it's also a manufacturing state, and there's a lot of industrial workers in eastern Iowa that have really made up former President Trump's base, because remember, eastern Iowa, these counties used to be a Democratic stronghold. In 2016, former President Obama clinched them handedly, and then it was former President Trump who then flipped them in 2016 and then again in 2020. So it's unsurprising that these first counties, these more rural eastern Iowa counties that are coming in, are going for former President Trump because they make up a really large part of his base. What I'm going to be watching for is in central Iowa, as these more populous counties come in, like Polk County, where we are in Des Moines, as well as Story County, right to our north, home to Ames and Iowa State University. It's the youngest county in Iowa, and that's where we see a lot more moderate voters. These are areas where former President Trump lost those counties in the 2016 caucus, not to Senator Ted Cruz, but to a more moderate candidate, Senator Marco Rubio. So I'm going to be watching for those margins from those central counties. I actually had the chance to catch up with the GOP county chair of Story County, asked him about former President Trump and his popularity. Take a listen to what he told me about how voters there are resonating with the former president.
Anytime you have a former president, they're going to be strong. They have strong incumbency. It's quasi-incumbency at this point, right? But name ID, those types of things, there's so many things that come with that. But at the end of the day, you know, if he's elected, he'll only have one term, and, you know, that hampers you. Every president in their second term kind of gets hampered a little bit on what they can accomplish. And then also, you know, I would really like to see a candidate that we can actually talk about issues and not have everything sucked up with all the other chaos around that and the court cases and everything else going on.
It's still early in the night, but we will now be watching for that margin between first and second place and second and third place as the night continues on. Kaylee.
All right, Tyler Kendall, thank you so much. For more, we have Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson and Washington Bureau Chief Peggy Collins joining us now around the table. We are an hour into the evening now, ladies, and we already have a lot of the information we were seeking. What we do not yet know, of course, is the fate of DeSantis and Haley, how they will perform here and what happens to their campaigns from this point on. And Peggy, I know you were just at a caucus site. Can you tell us more about how was attendance, how was turnout, especially given the weather? What was the energy like? Who was speaking there on behalf of the candidates? What did you see and hear?
So we certainly saw low turnout, and we talked to the people that were working there, and they did say it was low turnout. You know, the cold weather is certainly a factor here, but it wasn't windy when we were outside, so it was actually a positive in that sense, but it was still very, very cold. We did talk to voters there, and two issues were top of mind. One was the economy, the other was border. They talked about border security, and an AP Vocast poll before we went to the caucus site this afternoon put immigration among Iowa Republican voters ahead of the economy. So that was certainly something that was on voters' minds there. We did also see some voters there that were registering as Republicans for the first time in order to vote for someone other than Trump. Nikki Haley's name came up, but I will say that those were two of the biggest issues that were on the minds of voters that we talked to tonight.
Yeah, Wendy, what do you think of this VoteCast result? I thought it was the economy stupid. Are we seeing a shift in voter priorities, at least among Republicans? For now, it's going to be, it's immigration stupid.
Right. Right now it is immigration stupid, and I'm not talking to you directly, and I hope you weren't to me. But the right, part of this is that it's in the news right now, right? That the Congress is working on a border security plan. The candidates are talking about it all the time, and voters, even in states far away from the border like Iowa, are waking up to this issue, perhaps for the first time, and realizing what a big problem it is. On the other hand, it's been a big problem for a long time. Yeah. You're seeing those pictures of the migrants arriving in New York and Chicago, and the scenes on the Texas border, and it is something that is becoming of top of mind, while the economy is sort of this undercurrent to everything. You know, the prices, it's a problem, but when something spikes like this, it becomes closer to the top of the issues.
What's interesting is we've been hearing from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has, to this point, or at least until recently, been reluctant to go on the attack against former President Trump, has been making the point that he says Trump did not follow through on his promises, including the building of the border wall or having Mexico pay for it. And Governor DeSantis promises he will do that it would be different if he were president. Governor DeSantis has invested a lot here in Iowa. He talks up his ground game, but frankly, he's just burned a lot of money here in the Hawkeye state. What is the path forward for his campaign, considering we now know that it's been called for Trump? He's not going to win in Iowa. How does this campaign move forward?
Right. He's not going to win Iowa. But now the battle, and what we're going to be watching the rest of the evening, is does he come in second place or does Nikki Haley come in second place? If he comes in second place, he might, you know, go to New Hampshire and try to come in at least second there, because we think either projecting now that Donald Trump or Nikki Haley might win New Hampshire, where they've invested a lot of time and money, and then Ron DeSantis can compete in South Carolina. But he has to make a good showing tonight. If he comes in third, then he's sort of limping to New Hampshire, where Nikki Haley or Donald Trump will do well, and then he might not have a good time the rest of it. And at that point, even the double Grassley, as you described earlier, going to all 99 Iowa counties twice, won't help him.
Wow. So to what extent does the future of Ron DeSantis' campaign ride on a second place finish tonight?
Well, I think a lot of it does, but also I think it will be the margin, right? Yeah. There's been a lot of attention over the past several days as to how big of a margin does Donald Trump win by. Will it be over 50% and then be a majority of Iowa Republican voters, or will it be much closer? So I think that also matters. But as Wendy just said, you know, we're coming up on New Hampshire on January 23rd, just about a week away. This is all going to pick up more speed over the next few days. But the surprise tonight on timing, as you said, Kaylee, how fast this was called is certainly already indicating a big win in some ways for Donald Trump.
Well, and on the point of timing, we have now heard from the DeSantis campaign on this. The quote from the communications director: "It is absolutely outrageous that the media would participate in election interference by calling the race before tens of thousands of Iowans even had a chance to vote." So that is from the campaign. Take it as you will. But Peggy, earlier today we had Roy Bailey, who is the chair of finance for Ron DeSantis' campaign, admit to us here at Bloomberg that it will be more difficult to fundraise if DeSantis cannot put up a strong showing here in Iowa. How much is this just a resource game, the ability to continue on a campaign which costs time, energy, and money?
Well, Co-Chair Bailey also said that it's gotten more and more expensive every time that someone is running in this country. So it's no doubt that the funding and the ability to track more donors to your campaign is going to be a big issue. I think they will pivot more of their resources to South Carolina, as we've learned over the past few days from their campaign. But certainly they're saying they're going to fight in New Hampshire. And that word fight, Kaylee, is something that we've heard a lot of in Iowa over the last few days from voters. You know, we talk about the economy, we talk about border, you talked about DeSantis' policy on border and immigration, but what we keep hearing time and again is that voters feel that Donald Trump is going to be the one that will fight for them across all of the issues.
I'm taken by this statement, Kaylee. We're barely an hour into the Iowa caucuses, and we've already got a campaign calling election interference. The DeSantis campaign's communication director says the media is in the tank for Trump. I thought the media was the enemy of the American people.
Well, it just depends on who we say won. Decides.
I guess so. But this is gonna mean a lot of noise coming out of it.
There is going to be a tremendous amount of noise out of this, and we will expect CBS and CNN and the AP, who all called it early, to show their work. essentially, in how they decided this. They are very, very careful in how they look at the map and look at where they favor. And it wasn't unexpected to call it for Donald Trump.
Yes.
But now, as we've said earlier, the race is for Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley to come in second. And that's what's going to be interesting the rest of the night.
Remarkable. We're unpacking an early call already here tonight with Peggy Collins and Wendy Benjaminson, two voices from Bloomberg you need to hear from tonight. We've got a lot more ahead as we continue our special coverage of the Iowa caucuses. We'll be back with our political panel next. Special global coverage from Des Moines on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We will build a wall. We will actually have Mexico pay for it in the way that I thought that Donald Trump was.
I said, I'm going to be a dictator. For one day, we're going to do two things. The border, we're going to make it so tight you can't get in unless you come in legally.
I have always said we are a country of laws. The second we stop being a country of laws, we give up everything this country was founded on.
We are going to have the largest deportation effort in the history of our country.
Republican presidential candidates weighing in on the border and immigration in the days leading up to these Iowa caucuses underway right now. Let's bring in our political panel, Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. Things are wrapping up now, but this race was called in the throes of that first hour of caucusing. Jeannie, the DeSantis campaign, having now seen this race called for Donald Trump, is calling it the media's election interference. Outrageous the media would participate in election interference before tens of thousands of Iowans even had a chance to vote. Is that fair?
You know, I have to say I am empathetic to this argument, and I'll tell you why. When we do polling, we're very careful, if we're on the East Coast, not to release results which would negatively impact people turning out in the polls in later states on the West Coast and Hawaii and Alaska and elsewhere. Because of that very reason, I mean, there's nothing more important in the democratic process than voting. If we are, as pollsters, to take the media out of it, releasing results which then diminish turnout in later states, I do think that that is potentially problematic. So all of which to say, I will not be surprised if this call and the timing of this is revisited, maybe in some state houses where they say, listen, you've got to keep these things and these calls quiet at least until the polls close. I think that's a fair trade-off myself. I don't think Rick agrees with me, but...
Well, Rick, jump in here. Is this likely to change the mind of anyone who was sitting in a church, in a community room, talking with other people, and everybody's checking their phone saying, oh, they called it for Trump already. Well, I might as well support that guy. Do you think it changed minds in real time tonight?
Kayleigh, these are people who just got out of their nice, warm living rooms into a freezing car at 10 below zero. Yeah. They drove to a caucus site, which is usually a gymnasium of some kind, which is probably drafty and cold. And they did it because they supported one candidate. And when they got there, they went through a very quick registration process, and at the same time filled out a ballot and stuck it in a popcorn box, right? Which is how they collect these things in some places. And that means that somebody would have had to have that information in the very early stages of a caucus that started at 7 o'clock. Okay. So with all due respect to the DeSantis camp, I mean, first of all, it's unlikely that someone who's committed to a candidate is going to just change because they heard something on AP. Yeah. And secondly, most of those ballots were probably done by 7:15, 7:30 before AP called it.
So we have a new election denier in this campaign?
A new one?
Yeah.
Ron
DeSantis.
Yeah, Ron DeSantis. I think he was on board with Trump's election denying. Why not just apply it to his own? Look, we're in an era in politics where no one takes defeat. And the campaign just goes on and on and on.
So there'll be no concessions tonight then?
I would not expect any concessions tonight.
Well, we at least have an explanation from the Associated Press about why they called this race so early. The Associated Press saying initial results from 8 counties showed Trump with far more than half of the total votes counted as of 8:31 p.m. Eastern Time, which was 7:31 local time, with the rest of the field trailing far behind. That is the explanation. So this idea being no one was going to be able to catch up, even as all of these other votes come in. So it becomes a question of the path forward. If it's not even close, and we don't know yet what the margin is, but even if you were to see a decisive second place for someone, how momentum driving can that really be if you're still far behind the man who came in first?
You know, I don't disagree. How's that for a double negative with what the AP has done mathematically? I think they're absolutely right, and the call is probably right. I think where I agree with what DeSantis's team is saying to a certain extent, and I understand they're frustrated, is the idea that couldn't you hold the call until the caucuses close? Is that too much to ask? And I agree with Rick. I don't think people would change their minds. Oh, I heard Trump won, so now I'm just not, going to go Trump. Yeah. But let people cast their ballot. Let us all engage in that important American process of voting, that democratic process, before the media jump in and say, we're calling this thing. I think that's a fair ask. I don't think we need, I don't know whether we get there legally, but I think we do it in polling. I think it can be done in the media outlets as well. And I don't think it's election denying, by the way. I think it's asking that the process be fair. You let people cast their ballots, and then we talk about
election interference, though. That's a serious charge.
It's a serious charge, and it's because it was called, quite frankly, before these caucuses closed down. This was 7:32. Yeah. They opened at 7. Rick, what if somebody was in their car driving there? It's icy. They couldn't get there on time. Can't they get there and put their thing in the popcorn box?
Don't you have to be there on time? Isn't that the rule?
You do have to be there on time. And
well, with the weather.
Let's just put this into context.
Yes.
Trump is beating him by 40 points. I mean, okay, so how many votes did he really affect if that's the case, right? Hundreds? Well, first of all, there hadn't been even that many reported. So, look, I mean, AP is the gold standard on calling elections. I'm not going to second guess their algorithm and how they did it or when they did it. And I think one of the things that Ron DeSantis needs to start to learn in this process is a lot of voters don't like griping politicians who complain why they lost. There's been a thorough examination in this state of the DeSantis campaign, and he came up lacking. And no charge of election interference is going to change that narrative coming out of here for him. We still have a contest going on. There's still a hot contest for second place. Those numbers seem pretty close. In some counties, DeSantis is ahead of Nikki Haley, and in others, Nikki Haley is leading. Nikki Haley has the only 2 counties in the state where she is ahead in the county and could actually win that county. DeSantis does not have a single county out of 99 that he visited twice that he's actually winning right now. So I think keep our eye on the ball. We have a hot race here for second place. Let's tune in and see whether or not Nikki Haley can create an upset victory here in Iowa for second place.
An upset victory for the silver medal, not the gold.
That's correct. But we knew that going in, that would likely be the case. You've outlined a possible scenario in which they're tied here in Iowa. Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley fighting for second. What would that mean going into New Hampshire, where she's said to have momentum?
You know, I'm hard-pressed to imagine, even if they're tied, or even if Ron DeSantis does, best serves to second place, that he has much of a game in New Hampshire at this point. So I think, as his team announced, they're going to go to South Carolina and New Hampshire same day. I think he would try to battle it out. Doesn't sound like he's going to pull back, even if he gets in third at this point. But I think it's a tough sell for Ron DeSantis. Where does he go now? And looking at these numbers, it looks like Trump is going to win a lot of counties, but Nikki Haley may win a few. I'm not sure that Ron DeSantis is going to win any counties here. And you know what people don't like either? They don't like when they have interference in their ability to cast their ballot by being told the thing is over before it's, they've had a chance.
Perceived or otherwise.
Yes, perceived or otherwise. So it's not the math, it's the timing of this thing. It's 32 minutes. This is historic. And I think it can be potentially problematic from a Democratic perspective.
It's so interesting because it strikes me that we're sitting here in Iowa days before what could have been a partial government shutdown. There's a whole funding battle happening on Capitol Hill that touches on many of the same things that these candidates are raising. The idea that it was too much fiscal spending that has led to inflation, that border security is an issue and needs to be addressed, even if it means closing down parts of the government. How much, Rick, does what we're seeing playing out here tonight, the messaging from these candidates, actually resonate with what's happening back home where we usually are in Washington?
Well, it's interesting because just let's look at the closing arguments this week here in Iowa of the candidates. I mean, Nikki Haley was all about electability. I can beat Joe Biden. Well, that's not really a substantive policy argument, right? She's not talking about cutting the debt and things like that. She's talking about her own electability. And Ron DeSantis, he's all about family values and sort of like what a good guy he is, and let's send a message. I'm the underdog, as we talked about earlier. And what did Donald Trump say? I mean, like, nothing about policy. He's like, here's our chance to prove them all wrong, right? He is still fighting the establishment. And he talked about let's settle the personal score. The ultimate victory is ours over all the liars, cheats, thugs, perverts, frauds, and crooks. That's his closing argument. Yeah. And so, nobody is touching on anything that is relevant to running our country out of Washington today.
And since this race was called for Donald Trump, he's now calling on all of the other candidates to drop out. Shocker.
Okay, everybody hold those thoughts. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are sticking with us. Coming up, though, we got to get a quick check on the markets. This is special coverage of the Iowa caucuses on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is special coverage of the Iowa caucuses on Bloomberg TV and radio. We thank you for joining us. The race called early for Donald Trump, but we've got a long way to go here in figuring out second, third, and the margins of victory. Bloomberg's Julie Fine joins us for more from the Iowa Election Center, where she's got her eyes on the numbers right now. Julie, how long do you think we'll wait to learn more?
I think it's going to be a while before we really determine second and third place, because if you look at the numbers that have come in, they're in the smaller counties and they're smaller groups of people. So let's talk to our global audience a little bit. In a caucus situation, people come together and vote. The numbers that they're getting now are from smaller groups, from more outlying areas. You're going to need a big dump from Des Moines or the bigger cities to really get that picture on second place. And right now, the numbers are really showing that Governor Ron DeSantis and Governor Nikki Haley, the former ambassador to the UN, they're really locked in at 17%. But again, I really want to caution here, we're looking at just about 1% of the vote. So the former president right now is well above 50%. But to really dissect the 17%, you're going to have to see bigger numbers from bigger counties. Now, the former president, of course, Joe and Kayleigh, we have talked about this, needed to make a very big number tonight to make a statement over 50%. Right now, he is hit there. So now, again, the race is for second place. What I'll really be watching is Sioux County to see how that goes. for Governor DeSantis. You also have to really pay attention to Des Moines and the Des Moines suburbs to see where that plays out for Nikki Haley. Those numbers appear not to be in quite yet. So again, there is a long way to go, and that race for second place now is something you really have to keep your eye on. Why? You really have to keep your eye on that for the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. His eggs are in the Iowa basket. If he does not do as well as Nikki Haley, or they're neck and neck here, he goes to New Hampshire, where Haley has really been putting on the press for votes and for the win. This is a critical night for Ron DeSantis and for the DeSantis campaign. Kaylee and Joe.
All right, Bloomberg's Julie Fine at the Election Center. Thank you so much. Back with us now around the table, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shan Zaino. So, Jeannie, she was just making the point there about how invested DeSantis has been in New Hampshire, how this feels, at least to many of us who have been watching it, like something of a make or break moment for his campaign. Even if he gets second place, if Trump's lead is commanding enough, can his campaign realistically move forward from here?
You know, I think he probably will, especially if he comes in second. But I do think it's a real uphill battle. When we look at some of the models, you know, it becomes increasingly harder for either DeSantis or Haley, if they lose in Iowa, lose in New Hampshire, to get the number of delegates they need to beat Donald Trump. So I think it's an uphill battle for him, even if he comes in second, because we talked about the fact he doesn't have much of a game in New Hampshire. He's going to try in South Carolina. He's not polling well there. Nevada has been completely pulled out from under them due to what Trump has done there. So it's really, really tough to see where he goes from here, especially even if he comes in second numerically and in terms of the actual percentage, to lose counties, not win any, which could happen. I think it's really hard to make the case that there's a pathway forward for him.
Boy, this is remarkable, the extent to which the narrative has changed since we came on the air this evening. Ron DeSantis, to Julie Fine's point, put his eggs in the Iowa basket. Nikki Haley put her eggs somewhere in New Hampshire. And I wonder how she can control the narrative in the next 4 days, moving into Manchester to spin whatever happens here tonight as maybe not a positive, but something that could be followed on by a big win in the first in the nation primary state.
Yeah, I would say Nikki Haley is running a multi-state campaign, right? Ron DeSantis is running a single state campaign. She did come in late off of some momentum that she was generating and spent heavily in the last 2 weeks. She's dominated the airwaves, spending much, much more than Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis combined. So she played here. She just played in a different way without the ground game. We're going to see whether or not that materializes as a second place finish for her. But she does have a very strong operation in New Hampshire, starting with the endorsement of the incredibly popular governor, Chris Sununu. Yeah. And his entire state organization is behind her, in addition to the fact that, as Jeannie has pointed out, she has built her own impressive organization there and has attended and put on many town halls that New Hampshire voters love to test their candidates in. So she actually starts well ahead, even before the night is over, well ahead of Ron DeSantis in New Hampshire, and frankly on par with the organization and the support that Donald Trump has there. So she knows the game starts for her in New Hampshire tonight. As soon as she gets on a plane and leaves here, whether it's tonight or first thing tomorrow morning, she has a fresh start with some momentum. She hasn't been written out of this narrative yet, and you know, it's game on in New Hampshire tomorrow.
Well, you say she's running a multi-state campaign. DeSantis maybe has been a single-state campaign to this point. Either way, we've seen that it's very expensive. So the donor question is raised here as well. DeSantis has been going after Haley in recent weeks on the idea that she's in this for her donors' issues, whereas he says he's in it for voters' issues. But he's struggled in the donor department in a way that she hasn't. Their fates almost in that regard have reversed. How does the outcome in Iowa impact their ability to access resources going forward? How do you fundraise if you haven't just won?
Yeah, you have to live off the land. And unfortunately, I've been involved in a lot of campaigns.
You go foraging.
Had to live off the land. And it is possible. Yeah, you find other ways to compete. You do, frankly, what Ron DeSantis has been doing here is going and putting yourself out there with 5-6 events a day. And part of the advantage Nikki Haley has is she's been working that hard. She's been doing those events every day, but she's also got a little bit of momentum where the money has rushed in. Look, there's a reason that front runners usually win, because they have the money. And insurgents usually complain that, it's a money game for them. Voters don't care. In fact, I think most voters respect the fact that a campaign can raise money, because at the end of the day, whoever is the Republican nominee, they're going to have to raise a lot of money to beat Joe Biden. He is sitting there with over $100 million cash in an account ready to wage a campaign war against the Republican nominee.
See, we haven't talked about Joe Biden for most of the night. It might be the first time I've heard that name. Are they popping corks here at Biden campaign headquarters? Because the narrative was that, he wants to face Trump again. He's the one he knows he can beat. But numbers like this might make you think twice.
I think they're popping them quietly.
Yeah.
They don't want to get out ahead of themselves. But the reality is, you look at the polls, and the national polls were showing that who could beat him? Nikki Haley. Ron DeSantis and Trump were beating him within a margin in the latest polls. But Nikki Haley had a pretty commanding lead over Biden. And so we've long thought that the Biden campaign would prefer to run against somebody as unpopular as the president is, quite frankly, and that is Donald Trump. So if that narrative continues, then I think they are quietly saying, this is where we want to be. We beat him before, we can do it again. Yeah. But, I think that's a really dangerous game. Donald Trump is an incredibly good politician, as long as much as he likes to say he's not. He's great at this. And Joe Biden is as well. So I think they have to be careful what they wish for.
Of course, the Bloomberg Morning Consult poll, Kaylee, in the 7 swing states we've been following show Joe Biden actually has probably more to worry about than conventional wisdom might suggest. We're going to stick with Rick and Jeannie here, and we'll be back with more of our conversation live from Des Moines. Coming up, we will add the voice of a real insider, longtime Iowa political strategist David Caucus is with us next on a special Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is special coverage of the Iowa caucuses on Bloomberg TV and radio. We're live in Des Moines. And joining us now, a longtime Iowa political strategist. They call him the dean of Iowa politics. That would be David Caucus. It's wonderful to have you at the table here in the throes of a night like this. David, we had an early call for Donald Trump, but still a lot of questions about margins and turnout as we look at these very cold people walking by. Knowing the weather was a real factor here. What are you hearing about turnout at this stage of the game?
Well, it's going to be well under what was expected.
Yeah?
Obviously, in 2016, 187,000 people turned out. 2024, I think most people were setting the over-under at 150,000, and a lot of people would have taken the over. The truth is, this campaign hasn't been that exciting because Donald Trump has had a big lead almost all the way through Iowa. So there's two campaigns now to watch. It's Trump versus himself. Can he get over 50? If he's under 50, that says half of Iowa voters said no thank you.
Okay.
And then the race, obviously, for second place. This high stakes for Ron DeSantis, bets it all here. It's really the only place he's campaigned. He spent a ton of money, and he and Nikki Haley are going to go, I think, back and forth all night. I have a feeling that if they're deadlocked right now with just a few counties in, the largest counties report latest, because these are hand-counted ballots on the ground by volunteers. So those big, huge counties in places like Clive in Dallas County, in Marion and Lynn County, Bettendorf, big suburbs where she overperforms, if those come in late, that might put her past DeSantis, in which case I think DeSantis has a lot to think about overnight.
How about that?
Do you think realistically we could see DeSantis out of this race as soon as tomorrow morning?
You could. If he finishes in third place after having Governor Reynolds, Bob Vander Plaats, a bunch of legislators, over $100 million in spending from the super PAC, the biggest ground game spend we've ever seen in Iowa. And he started in the high 30s here when he got into the race and just kind of fell over the summer and the fall. What case can he make? If he finishes third here, he's already well behind in New Hampshire. He's well behind in South Carolina. Those are the next two contests that matter. It's really hard to argue that somehow on March 5th, on Super Tuesday, he's going to be resurrected. So I don't see a path for him if he finishes third. If he's in second, maybe he has to go on to New Hampshire and see what happens. Yeah. Maybe something happens in the race that we can't foresee, but he's in tough shape if he comes out of Iowa third tonight.
Before 7:30 tonight, when this race was called, and some of the other things that you've learned since then, did you expect to hear concession speeches from anyone coming out of Iowa?
No, I've been around this a long time, 6 presidential campaigns, a few of whom didn't make it the distance. It's tough for a campaign to drop out after all this investment. You want to get with your family, you want to get with your top strategists, you want to talk about it. Usually there isn't a snap decision on a night like this. So I wouldn't expect to hear any concessions tonight. I think tomorrow morning everyone's going to wake up, reassess, see what their path is forward. If they can make a credible argument for a path forward, they'll try to stay in. You also have the idea that if you don't do well here, if you perform below expectations, you're not going to expect any more money to be coming in over the next week. And these campaigns run on, campaign donations. You got to have some money to go to New Hampshire. That's a Boston TV market, costs about $1 million a week. I don't know that DeSantis is going to have the resources to continue to compete, especially if he finishes, in third place, where he was not expected to finish.
We've talked at length about Governor DeSantis, about Ambassador Haley, about Trump this evening. We have not mentioned another candidate who spent a lot of time here, Vivek Ramaswamy. He says he did a double Grassley. He went to all 99 counties twice. Yeah. Does that traditional Iowa politicking not matter anymore if he's barely even registering enough for us to bring him up until we're an hour and 45 minutes into this program?
I think Vivek is a special case here. If you liked Vivek Ramaswamy and you showed up at his events, you were voting for Donald Trump. He's kind of the mini Trump in this race. He had that message, and I kind of think he really wasn't running to be president. He's kind of running to be a MAGA celebrity, maybe Alex Jones. I just think his campaign hasn't been serious for a while. The first couple of debates, he was two completely different people. I think Iowans, they up close, I think they found him to be phony. And I felt like he wasn't going anywhere for the last 2 months, and it's proved to be true.
Well, if he's polling at 8% and he drops out, do those votes go straight to Donald Trump?
They do. Yeah. And in New Hampshire, I don't even think he's polling at 8%. I think he's polling well below that.
Here in Iowa.
So here in Iowa, And I look, he's not going to hit 8% tonight. Yeah. Those votes already went to Donald Trump and might be the thing that puts him over 50, which is, I think, where they want to be. So, Vivek just couldn't land it here. As much time as he spent, he pulled out his money a while back. He's been off the air. So, I think most people who are watching this closely saw that coming.
We are joined by a global audience this evening on television and radio. There's people watching from all over the world who essentially are trying to figure out what this means for who's going to be the nominee in 2024. To what extent right now do you think the Iowan electorate, Republicans here in Iowa, are those who perhaps decided to register as Republicans for this evening to participate in this choice, To what extent do you think that is reflected of the country more widely in terms of the issues that are resonating for voters? Do we think actually Iowa may be more reflective this time around of the way the rest of this race is going to go?
Yeah, but Iowa is usually not a great predictor of who the nominee is going to be.
I'm just wondering if this time is different.
Yeah, it might be different. We have to go through New Hampshire and kind of see what New Hampshire does. New Hampshire likes to say, okay, Iowa, nice work, we're going to change it now. And we heard Nikki Haley joke about that a week or so ago in New Hampshire. What Iowa's job really is, and what people need to understand, we're not picking the nominee here. We're winnowing the field down to a manageable race where voters really get to say, okay, of these 2 or 3 viable candidates, now we're going to select them. We've already dispensed with a whole bunch of candidates that had high hopes coming in here. Mike Pence is out, Tim Scott is out, Doug Burgum is out. A whole host of candidates didn't even make it to Iowa. Usually we say there are 3 tickets out of Iowa. I actually think tonight there might be 2. And that would be interesting because that puts us in a one-on-one race with Donald Trump well before we saw that in 2016. We were in Florida with multiple candidates way down the calendar into March. And what Trump doesn't want, he wants to wrap this up quickly. He's got a lot of other things on his plate right now. What we need to see is, can New Hampshire maybe reverse this result, show a little bit of vulnerability with Trump if Nikki Haley were to squeak past him in New Hampshire? I think that'll scramble the national polls some. The money will flood into her campaign, and I think Donald Trump might have a race in South Carolina. He's got a lead now, but this is part of a whole, several months where he's had a dominant national lead, and other states aren't paying as close of attention as they are here, where he could finish under 50, and as they are in New Hampshire. So he's the overwhelming frontrunner now. There is no question about that. If he were to lose New Hampshire, I think you'd watch some national polling change, and there might be a few cracks in that inevitability.
All right, well, at the very least, he's claimed that first ticket out of Iowa. We're still waiting to see who gets the second. David Kochel, thank you so much for joining us here in Des Moines this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, coming up, we'll be back with Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano to help close out this night. Special coverage of the Iowa caucuses on Bloomberg Television and radio. This is special coverage of the Iowa caucuses on Bloomberg Television and radio. We're getting more numbers out throughout this evening after the race was called for former President Donald Trump, and Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall is here with the latest. Tyler, what else do we know? What are the figures telling us?
Yep, Kaylee. So now about 36% of the expected vote is in, and that includes most of eastern Iowa and also central Iowa. I want to pull out 2 counties. One is Polk County, where we are here in Des Moines. That is trending towards former President Trump, as well as Dallas County. That is right to the west of us. It is the fastest growing county in Iowa. These 2 counties very populous, but also considered more moderate, places where Nikki Haley has really been focusing her campaign attention. Interesting, too, Dallas County, Mitt Romney in 2012 in that general election, he won it by 12 points. Trump then won it by 9 points, but the last election, he only won it by 2. So this was an area that Nikki Haley's campaign has really been targeting, trying to get those moderate voters. These were the central counties that I think she was hoping to make a splash in tonight.
All right, Tyler, thank you so much. And as we close out the program this evening, Joe, we got to bring in our closers, as we always do.
That's correct. There's only one closing panel, and that's Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. This moved fast tonight. We're not done. I'm wondering, Rick, if we're going to wake up tomorrow and know second and third places.
Yeah, look, I think the reporting is coming in on pace. And as Dave Kochel was talking about, some of these bigger counties, bigger precincts, it takes a while to hand count all those ballots.
Sure.
But the reporting system seems to be working perfectly. The chairman of the Republican Party told us that he thought it was going to be smooth, and it looks like he made good on that promise. So I think we'll know by the time we wake up in the morning. But maybe we just shouldn't go to sleep until we find out who's going to be in second place in Iowa.
Well, none of us are planning to, let's be honest.
Volunteering all of us for all-nighters here. Jeannie, I just had something hit my inbox from Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. A short while ago, Donald Trump won the Iowa caucus. He is now one step closer to becoming the Republican nominee, then goes on to ask for donations. How does this shape the race beyond just the Republican primary, but as President Biden is actively engaged in general election politics right now.
Yeah, it's so important because, of course, we're talking about his commanding lead, but of course, we have to remember this is all on the Republican side. And as we move into the national view of things, you have a very unpopular former president in President Trump, who people, to Gavin Newsom's point, are very concerned about the impact he has on democracy. The fact that he is still litigating the 2020 election. The fact is he has lost more elections than he's won, and he has refused to admit that. He has, to Rick's earlier point, been endorsing candidates in the last midterm who didn't do well. So these are all problems for the Republican Party, and this is why so many moderate Republicans wanted to look ahead and try to find somebody else. But at this point, at least in Iowa, they are saying no, no, no. And, you know, I think we should say turnout, if it is as low as David Caucus said, or others have said, 100,000, 110,000, that's 1/7 of registered Republicans in this state. That is a very small slice of people who can get out to vote.
So what do we extrapolate from that? Let's say we get 110, 120,000 here compared to the all-time high north of 180,000. Rick, your takeaways knowing that turnout might have been that low?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's cold outside.
Yes.
And so, like,
and
normal
it was
people,
advantage Trump, though.
We thought, actually, it would disadvantage Trump to have this low of a turnout. So it shows the resiliency of the Trump vote here. I might also, Matt, just add, Iowa was not always a red state. I mean, Donald Trump's emergence in 2016, even though he lost the Iowa caucus, he won the state, and he won it big. And he converted a lot of blue-collar white voters, especially in the northwest of this state, who used to be Obama voters, into Republican voters. And he did the same thing in other places around the country. So the reason he won in 2016 was he had a partial realignment of certain voters of a certain class into the Republican Party, and the Democrats have not been able to make a dent in getting them back.
All right, we have exactly 1 minute left, so this is a quick answer for both of you. Will we still have 4 candidates for the nomination when we get to New Hampshire next week, Jeannie?
I don't think we should, so I am going to say no, but at this point it's hard to tell because they're still waiting to see what happens.
Rick?
I think it's irrelevant. It's a head-to-head race from this point on. Even if Ron DeSantis can eke out a minor win against Nikki Haley, she's got the momentum, and it's a head-to-head for New Hampshire.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzana with us throughout this evening. The Iowa caucuses, which have been called for former President Donald Trump. We're waiting for results on number 2 and 3. Thank you for joining us here. Balance of Power will be back at 5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow from Washington, and we'll have special coverage of the New Hampshire Republican primary next Tuesday, live from Manchester. This is Bloomberg.